Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Take Back My Brain. I am your host, Laurie Hammer, and today I have with me Beth Krause, and we're going to dive into kind of a sensitive topic, not just in general in the world, but also just for us as women and as moms when we receive a cancer diagnosis. And as all of you know who are listening, or most of you know, I had a cancer diagnosis in the past. And so Beth and I are both holistic practitioners. She runs Grace Anatomy Functional Health and Nutrition. And so she is all about helping people with sleep and movement, nutrition, stress, emotions, all of those things. She's also a wife, a mom. She has children, grandchildren. And so we're just going to dive into what does getting a cancer diagnosis, how does that affect every piece of your life? And we were both just talking at the beginning how that's not our identity. We don't look at ourselves in the mirror like, wow, I'm a cancer survivor, right? Because that's not who we want to identify. We want to identify as healthy, whole human beings that God has created, that He has healed to lead a movement, to lead wellness to the world. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to, share Beth's story. We'll probably get into a little bit of my story too, but just know that this is what we're talking about today. And I thank you, Beth, for being here.
I thank you, Laurie, for inviting me and encouraging me to be a part of this. I think this is a great thing that you are doing and to get the word out to all of your listeners and mine as well.
Awesome. So thank you very much. Well, first of all, I want to know how did you become a functional health practitioner? Tell us a little bit about that journey before we dive into some other things.
Well, my journey is not a fast one. It was over a course of several different things in my life experiences that brought me to this place that I'm at today. And that part of that is seeing the fracture uh, that has happened within the medical system. I started out going to nursing school, a medical assistant, and moving through my cancer journey and
Mm-hmm.
seeing the different things. I did go the chemotherapy and radiation because I was in my 20s, and this
Right.
was 26 years ago. So because of that, seeing what they actually put in me
Mm-hmm.
and then struggling 15 years with side effects and surgeries and things that we'll get into
Yeah.
later. But then what really started sealing the deal is when I became a patient advocate for my parents and some different things that had happened with misdiagnoses and me having to fight for different tests to prolong life for my father that gave us an extra 11 years with him.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
But then ending up also having to advocate for him at his end of life last year.
Wow.
Um, and that type of thing. So over the course of my life journey, it has brought me to look at the medical side of it and go, something's not right here.
Mm-hmm.
At one point in time, up leading up to my cancer diagnosis, I was on so many different prescription medications. I was actually in a wheelchair at one point.
Wow, Beth.
And I was taking up to, including vitamins and prescriptions, I was taking 60 pills a day,
Mm-hmm.
walking with a cane, was in a wheelchair, and still had all these, my children at home. And yeah, that's not a way of life for me. And to this day, I have no symptoms now.
Mm-hmm.
So and largely because of how I've changed my thought processes and what I do on a regular basis.
Right, right. So let's get into you were in a wheelchair before you had your cancer diagnosis.
Yes.
So what was going on in your health at that point in time that you ended up in the wheelchair?
Before I had I had I do have fibromyalgia, but I don't claim it.
Mm-hmm.
um, and then I also had lupus, and um, I did not know that I was living with mold toxicity.
Yeah.
And, but we were living in a house full of black mold, which we did not realize until several years later until my oldest son graduated from college, and we ended up
Wow.
losing our house to black mold. So all of these things
Right.
compound.
Mold is so insidious.
Oh, it is.
Yeah. And for those of you listening out there, if you have, we'll just use your diagnoses as an example, lupus, the fibromyalgia, all those things like that could be mold related. And a lot of times we're like, well, I did an air test, I did this, and it just doesn't show up, right? And so
Right.
you really have to dig deep because there's a lot more mold issues out there than people really realize. So, I mean, even cancer related, it depresses your immune system and all of a sudden things go rogue and cancer can be a fungus, it can be a parasitic issue, it can be all these different things, and mold just kind of explodes that whole issue.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you found mold, you had these diagnoses. What happened next?
So because of all of these things that were starting to kind of snowball, it attacked my system
Right.
systemically and my joints and my muscles specifically. So I just started losing function of the length and strength of how far I could go, how much I could do. My joints were swelling and just all of that. So at the time, I didn't know what was going on. I was having all of these reactive flares and
Mm-hmm.
not knowing any of this, and in the meantime, also having children.
Right. You're
So,
just still trying to function.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I am a migraine. I do still suffer with migraines. They are getting fewer and not as intense. But during that time, I was having days upon days of
Mm.
migraines where I was out of commission, couldn't even lift my head off a pillow on top of the muscle and joint aches and pains. Um, so yeah, it was quite the journey, and this all in my 20s.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. So how did you find your mold?
Uh, when my son was graduating, this was in 2007, he was graduating from high school, and I thought, I just want to, we lived in family farm. My husband's a farmer, and we went to redo this tiny little bathroom, and I took a medicine cabinet off the wall to repaint the
Mm-hmm.
wall, and the whole wall came with the medicine cabinet.
Oh gosh.
And this was in our little our master bedroom. And I'm like, this is not probably good because
No,
the wall was wet
pretty good
and
indicator.
yeah. And so then we had a contractor friend that came and did punch testing and found that um, they had to punch test through a bunch of walls, a bunch of ceilings, and it was black mold hiding in our walls. And from there, it just got worse. So we went from having this home to being homeless all in 24 hours.
Wow. And this was, you found it after the cancer diagnosis.
This was after the cancer. But what was happening in between from cancer to the black mold is I would go to bed at night feeling fine and I would wake up with double pneumonia the next day.
Oh my.
And it was
Mm-hmm.
that stark, but it made sense because my one and only, I have two daughters, but the only child that was actually conceived and born in the house that we were at is the only child that also has allergies to this day.
Sure. Sure. That makes
So,
sense. Yeah.
yeah. And she was getting worse and worse instead of better. Um, and we couldn't figure out why. And then we removed the house, removed the mold, and now she, to this day, she is a police officer. She CrossFitted and she couldn't even walk, she couldn't run 100 yards without using an inhaler before.
Wow.
So it's amazing how mold can just
Yeah.
compress and depress.
I know your story is so similar. I was in nursing school, so it's so similar to mine. And we've had cancer diagnosis. We both had mold issues. So in our bathroom even. So it's just interesting the parallels going on here. There could be a connection, right? Could be a
Yeah.
connection. Yeah. I have a question as far as nursing school goes? Did you get sick after you had vaccinations in nursing school?
I didn't do vaccinations.
You didn't? Okay.
Mm-mm.
Good for you. How did you not do them? I'm just so curious.
I just said I just won't. Religious exemption.
Right. And at that time, when I was in nursing school, I didn't even know about any of that stuff,
Okay.
and I got really, really sick from the vaccines.
Oh,
Like I couldn't even finish, um, I couldn't finish the series because I got so sick. And I ended up dropping out my third year of nursing school because I was so sick.
oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And then I had the fibromyalgia, and eating disorder was off the charts, lots of yeast issues, all those kind of things. So that really kind of set that in a spiral for me.
Oh my goodness. I
Yeah.
can, yeah.
Well, good
I,
for you for knowing that at the time and just saying, no, I'm not going to do that. Can you imagine how much worse things would have been, had you
oh,
had
I
all of
can't
those? Because it's
imagine.
a lot of vaccines. And that was, 30 years ago, when that was happening for me. So it's
Right.
even worse now. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah. So tell us about your cancer diagnosis.
Okay. So, when I went in, actually, 1 month before I had my annual with my OBGYN,
Mm-hmm.
and there was nothing there. I was still even nursing my fourth child.
Wow.
And so, because we are speaking mainly to women,
Mm-hmm.
um, my husband actually felt a lump.
Mm-hmm.
And I was teaching OB classes at the time. Um, so I was very familiar with the OB doctors that worked in the
Mm-hmm.
department. And so I said, he goes, "Oh, what is this?" And I'm like, "Oh, don't worry about it. It's clogged milk duct. Don't worry about it." But I
Mm-hmm.
called right away the next morning
Uh-huh.
and asked my OB if he could get me in. And he says, "Oh, don't worry." He says, "I'll see you before I see patients."
Uh-huh. Oh, that was
I'm at
good.
7.
Yeah.
So he got me in right away. And he said the same thing I said to my husband. So I knew he was not telling me the truth. Like,
Because you
yeah,
knew.
okay.
Yeah.
Um, this is not, this is probably, this is probably what I think it is.
Mm-hmm.
So he got me in. I didn't even leave the clinic that morning. He got me right in for all the tests.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I went back to see him later that morning, and he got me into surgical biopsy that afternoon. And um, by Friday, the following, no, by that Friday, they had me come in. Um, no, but that by that Friday, so that was on Monday morning. By Friday, they called and said your fine needle cell biopsy came back as positive for cancer.
Okay.
And so we would like to do you have, we want to schedule you for surgery. And you have these choices, A, B, C. You could do a
Mm-hmm.
mastectomy, radical lumpectomy, or we can just sit on it and wait. But we wouldn't suggest that because of the size of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so we went with the radical lumpectomy.
Mm-hmm.
And with the lymph node dissection, back then I was 1 year before sentinel node uh, discovery.
Okay.
So they did remove several of my lymph nodes.
Okay.
Uh, and they wanted to make sure they had at least as many as I was of age. So
Mm-hmm.
they removed at least 29
Wow.
all from underneath, across and down my arm. And um, they didn't understand what type of cancer I had at first. So they did send it to the UK to make sure, because it wasn't completely certain if it was cellular carcinoma.
Okay.
But it was.
Okay.
They did determine that it was. And then I had the typical cancer treatment after that, the 4 rounds of chemo,
Wow.
um, with the 36, I believe it was 36, 35, 7 weeks of radiation. So 35.
Okay.
treatments of radiation afterwards.
How did you function? How did you and your husband hold up with your kids and everything during this time?
We have a really strong family network, really strong church network.
Mm-hmm.
So on the weekends, my goal was to, I was just had started homeschooling my oldest son. He had just, started kindergarten. And my goal was to have my kids live as normal of life as possible, for me to
Yep.
stay as active as I could, not to let them see the horrible or awful side, um, praying that I wouldn't get horribly sick. And I really did pretty well, um, except for right before Christmas, because of course my treatment started right before Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
And then my very last treatment, I got really pretty, really pretty ill. Um, and my very first treatment, they gave me too much for my body frame, and
Oh,
so
wow.
I did get the septic ulcers that went down into my throat. But that could have been much worse. I
Right.
caught it in time, so then right before my next treatment, they didn't give me as much, and so that did
Mm-hmm.
alleviate those next time. So I journaled and kept a book, especially for my girls. And actually, I'm thinking about writing about this, but I actually kept a little journal about
Love
all of
it.
the different things that I went through,
Mm-hmm.
um, to keep for them, so
Wow.
they could see how I traveled my journey,
Yeah. Yeah.
and uh, to show them how I relied on Christ
Yes.
during my walk,
Yeah.
and how we had friends that would take them during the weekends that I had. So I always had my chemo on Friday,
Mm-hmm.
and they would go to family or friends
Oh,
on
that's so
Friday, and then
nice.
we would get them back on Sunday nights. And
Mm-hmm.
by Sunday nights, Monday mornings, I was feeling pretty normal again,
Mm-hmm.
could resume kind of,
Right.
snuggling with them. And
Wow, what a blessing that you had that.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So, and it lasted 35 weeks. And then what happened after that? What was your life after treatment?
Um, my life after treatment, because there were several surgeries, and then of course there's always, once you have that diagnosis, first of all, your body is depleted,
Completely.
and
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
completely. uh, People think that going through cancer is the hard part, and for me it was the after cancer that was the hard
Okay.
part,
Mm-hmm.
for a couple of different reasons. One, because you now have this thing in your mind that was alive in your body,
Correct.
and then you now are depleted,
Mm-hmm.
emotionally, physically. But you had, while you were going through cancer, you had a task that you had to stay focused on, right?
Sure. Sure.
After cancer, now the task is gone, but you still have the same mental space.
Right.
And I think too, seeing how that took effect on my husband, um, that it that whole it's a whole family thing,
Yeah,
and
it's not
so that
just
was
you.
hard for him
Mm-hmm.
too.
Yeah.
Did you find that for you as
Yeah,
well?
definitely a whole family thing. Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Yeah.
So for us getting back in that groove of, I'm no longer a patient, and yet you still are for several years out,
Mm-hmm.
and he's no longer a caretaker, but yet he still feels like it. He had made a bucket list for me,
Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
I was a young mom. He has young kids. What is he going to do? He's a farmer, he
Right?
doesn't know. He's like, in his mind, I don't know how to navigate kids and
Yeah,
farming and life without her.
correct.
So he's like, okay, if she does survive, I want to make this bucket list. And thankfully he did, because one of them was me getting horses. So we got into horses
Oh,
again.
yay, us too. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I grew up with horses, and I'm an
Mhm.
avid horseback rider. So,
Awesome.
uh, that's great. We do have a lot of
We
parallels.
it's my husband's a farmer too, so it's these
Oh my
parallels are
goodness.
crazy, Beth. They are just crazy.
Oh, my
Yeah.
word.
Yeah.
Um, and so we went from 0 horses to 12 because all of my kids started riding and
Awesome.
showing and
Yeah.
trail riding, and yeah, it was great. Um, so anyway, all of these things, how do you move forward and not
Hmm.
have cancer be the main thing
The main thing,
that you're
like everything
focusing
that
on?
you think about. Yes.
Yeah. And so that is another reason why I kept the journal, because I didn't want my kids to think cancer was our life
Right.
or my life. And I did speak at a couple of Relay for Lives, and I did speak at our prison in town. We have a federal correctional
Oh, okay.
institute that is now a women's facility, and
Hmm.
I have gone there and spoke to them. How can they move forward and function within the institution if they get a diagnosis? So moving forward, my kids always tease their friends would tease them that their snack pantry was always organic.
Yes. Always.
Yeah, and that their snacks were fruits,
Hmm.
and their junk food was their friends' nutritious food.
Health food, right?
Yeah. So, but the recovery effort was a mind shift, um, working through that. But then it was also very physical, because I did have lots of reverberating issues that came up. I had several other biopsies that ended up happening. I did have a bone biopsy. I had part of my femur they found a tumor in that they thought could have been bone cancer, ended up not. It was malignant. I mean, not malignant, benign.
Hmm.
Um, but so that was a recovery in and of itself. Um, just different things. Every little thing they would find, was another seed that kept getting planted. And I finally decided I don't I don't need to go that route. I don't need to take ownership of this.
Right.
Um,
And when you
I
say
need,
you don't need to take ownership of it, what does that mean?
as far as I need to do more of my own holistic health healing versus um, clinical findings.
Hmm.
Um, I do believe that people need to be diligent as far as taking care of the testing that they feel comfortable doing,
Yes.
and yet not over testing to the point where it becomes a burden mentally.
Right. It's an obsession. Like how many
Yes,
things can we check to make sure that there is nothing anywhere?
right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And knowing that just because you had a diagnosis doesn't mean that that means you should be looking for another one.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's what I'm
exactly.
saying
And
about
did
that.
you find that a piece of that as well was other people's projecting their expectation on you that probably another diagnosis would come up, or
Their
um,
fear.
their fear? I
Yeah.
found that was the most difficult piece to deal with was other people's fear.
Yes.
And navigating that, especially because, I didn't go the, medical route at all. And so it was a big spiritual attack, to be really
Mhm.
honest. I mean, I was radically healed, and the Lord opened up doors for me to figure out why, I had cancer in the first place. And other people's fears were really, really overwhelming. I will definitely say that. I still have people today like, so have you really been cancer free for 17 years? how are you feeling? You're okay? Like it's kind of bizarre actually. So,
Mhm.
no, seeds of the enemy, right?
Yes. Yes, definitely. Yeah, and my husband and I have discussed if it did ever come back, because during those 15 years, of course, there were times, especially when I would get, oh, you have to come in, you have to have a biopsy.
Yeah.
If it ever did come back, would we go that same route? And knowing what I do know today,
Mm-hmm.
and through those biopsies, even, we've looked at each other and said, there is no way we would go back that route again.
Okay, tell me
We
why.
would, because of all of the things. And yes, I am still here. So,
Yes.
but I know so many others, and I have helped others go the holistic and natural route that
Mm-hmm.
have traveled the same path, um, and have not done the clinical treatment.
Yeah.
They've done the holistic treatment, and they are also still here.
Yes.
So I would
Without
prefer.
a lot of the issues that you had from the,
Correct.
medical route
Yes.
treatment. Yeah.
Yes. So I'm not saying that people shouldn't go that direction. I'm saying that you need to weigh the pros and the cons and the recovery and the toll that it takes, and knowing that it is poison they are putting in your system, that your system does have to get back out,
Yes.
um, and that it does tank your immunity.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
Yeah. There's a lot of detoxing that has to be done
a
from the
lot.
treatment. Yes. And we
Yes.
praise the Lord that you are here.
Yes.
And there isn't any reason to believe that if you would have chosen something different, that you wouldn't also still be here.
Correct.
So, so tell us about the things that happened physically to you afterwards, and then I want to really dive into the mindset piece.
So physically, like after the whole recovery,
Yeah, like what did you have to deal with and had to recover from that as well? And you're still dealing
yes,
with some things. Yeah.
yeah. So physically, was the fatigue,
Hmm.
um, and then the muscle aches. And part of that then comes with, oh, we don't know how to help you. You have fibromyalgia.
Right.
But we already knew that previous, because they were already telling me before I had cancer that I had fibromyalgia. But then all of the your fibers, your nerve fibers are heightened after you go through chemo.
Oh, 100%.
That, I mean, even when I lost my hair, I remember, and I still get this with certain migraines. When my hair was starting to fall out, did you lose your hair too?
No, because I
Oh, you
didn't do
didn't,
any of
because
that.
you
Yeah.
didn't do
Yeah.
chemotherapy. When it was, of course, just a couple of days before Christmas, right? So,
Mhm. Right.
and they tell you just about when you think you're not going to lose your hair, that's when your hair will start to fall out. And my head just started to really hurt, like it was on fire and it was bruised, like
Mm.
somebody had just literally hit me over the top of my head with a bat. And I mean, it hurt. I couldn't even comb it because it hurt
Wow.
to even touch like the ends of my hair. And then just a day later, I went to wash my hair, and it is like a scene in a movie. I went to wash my hair, and it was in my hands
Oh,
in clumps.
yeah.
So I had my sister shave my head for me, and
Mhm.
she's fan, she's fantastic. So as she was shaving my head, she was like, I should take a picture and put this underneath the Christmas tree and give it back to you in a box and say, look what I got my sister for Christmas.
Oh, oh, bless her heart. That's great.
Yeah. So anyway, she did actually, and then she lost the picture, and I really wish I would have had it, because that would have been great to add to the journal.
Yes, yes.
Um, but just that feeling on the top of my head, even just talking about it, I can feel that.
Mm-hmm.
That is, and then if I get a bad migraine, I will have that feeling again.
Interesting.
Um, there is a name for it, and it's a very long name and I cannot remember it, but it is a neurological term.
Mm-hmm.
But so I still deal with that from from cancer. I will still get that pain in my
Wow.
at the top of my head. Um, but then the aches and the body aches and the pain were heightened. So anybody in the listening audience that has had these muscle aches, they know that certain parts of your body feel like bruises
Mm-hmm.
when your children come up and give you a hug, or somebody, will touch you just right, and you'll have that certain kind of tenderness. It was like you could literally lightly touch me in certain spots, especially alongside your legs.
Mm-hmm.
And you could send me into tears. It was
Mm.
that delicate, that sensitive.
Yeah.
Um, and then the gut issues were horrendous. They were um, IBS plus. There were times I couldn't drink water because I would have to be in the bathroom in order to drink it,
Wow.
or I would be so clogged up that I wouldn't have a bowel movement for 2 weeks,
Mm-hmm.
and it would be in writhing pain. So I would have those issues that I had to deal with.
Right, right.
Um, and then of course, then the in and out of the different biopsies. Some of them, a couple of them were surgical, and then some of them were inpatient, or
Mm-hmm.
outpatient. I'd just go
Wow.
in and it would be a bandage type of thing.
Right.
So, yeah. So, I mean, just a gamut of all of those
What
things.
close to things. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so much of cancer is emotional. I always tell my clients there's always an emotional piece behind everything that you have going on. And so you were talking a little bit about mind shift and emotions and those kind of things. I would love for you to delve into that, how you moved through it, past it. What did you discover? And, how did the Lord bring you through that?
That's exactly the key. It was the Lord.
Hmm.
uh, I am 100% reliant on Christ. And that is exactly what did bring me through it. It's because I will tell people straight up, I don't know how people get through things like this that do not have him present in their life,
Right.
because he is so grounding. And so when you are feeling so alone, and like no one understands, even other cancer survivors, or we had what we called our breast friend group.
Hmm.
There were a group of us ladies that whether they had breast cancer or not, just our little cancer group
Uh-huh.
um, that formed in church. um, we would get together and we would have like a cooking day. We would make food that we knew each other could eat, because we all transformed our diets.
Uh-huh. That's
And
amazing.
then we would just have like a coffee chat and a Bible study together.
Awesome.
Um, yeah, just as that support,
Yeah.
because we all had like um there were two that didn't do any therapy, and all the rest of us had done chemotherapy, and we were each other's support. We understood where each other were coming from, or how we would feel, or if we had chemo brain that day or whatever, because that also
Hmm.
is a real thing.
Real thing. Hmm.
Yes. And so, yeah, so that that is a huge thing, is to have a network of not just people, but people that understand. um I'm not a big proponent for so-called cancer support groups, because I don't think dwelling on the fact of the cancer,
Hmm.
but I enjoyed our group of people that had cancer that dwelled on God.
Right. To help you
It's a
move past that,
different,
because that's not your identity. He is.
right? He is who we were all grounded in, and he is who we sat in the presence of,
Hmm.
going through or having passed through it already.
Yeah.
And that was all of our big message to our families, is that even though we have had this is not what we want everybody to be focusing on.
Right. Right.
We are still who we are because of him.
Mm-hmm.
And several of those friends of ours, I think there's only two of us still surviving. Some of them were much older anyway. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
but there's two of us that are still surviving in that group.
Right. Are you
So,
still really close?
oh yeah,
Oh
yeah.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah. So what does life look like for you now? So not dwelling on the cancer, moving through with mindsets. Do you still have some fears that'll creep in every now and then if you have a twinge here or there or anything like that?
I really don't.
That's awesome.
Which I think some people think is maybe crazy, but I really don't, as because I have shifted my mindset. First of all, um, because I do rely on Christ, my fear of death is not there.
Yeah.
I don't fear dying. I have almost, we will be having our 13th grandchild here in October.
Wow.
So
Congratulations.
thank you. And I spend a lot of time with as many of them as I can. The four of them are in North Idaho and I live in southern Minnesota. So I don't get to see them as much. But I do spend a lot of time with them. And of course I would hate to leave them. We're all very close, they know who their Oma is,
Yes.
and love spending time with us. But I'm not afraid of where I am going to be. And I think that changes the perspective of, does it bother you, or does that fear creep in? It really doesn't. I don't have fear. I'm at peace um,
It's a
with that.
beautiful place to be.
Yes, it's very comforting
Mm-hmm.
to know that I'm in our Creator's hands.
Mm-hmm.
And and then with the functional health background too, and knowing that regardless of what starts to happen, I have a way that I can circumvent
Sure.
some of the predisposition. Um, I have the choice to change my epigenetics.
Mm-hmm. You
So,
too. And that's an empowerment right there. So I think when you get a cancer diagnosis, you don't feel very empowered because
right,
most of the time you're not given any other option as to how to be empowered through this, right? Um,
correct.
so let's talk just a little bit about the epigenetics. When you say that, what do you mean?
So we all have our set of genes, our DNA code that's set in place for us. But then surrounding that, you have these set of circumstances. So let's take movement, for example. So with movement, you still have this code, or even let's say, let's do a better one. If you say you have a family history of um, Parkinson's, my dad had Parkinson's.
Mm-hmm.
I could say that, oh, I am probably predestined then to have Parkinson's.
Mm-hmm.
But I have control. I don't have control over the genetic part of it, but I have control over what I do around it.
Yes.
So I can get better sleep. I can increase my movement. I can make sure that I am doing better nutrition. I
Mm-hmm.
can make sure I'm not taking certain prescribed medications that can deplete my dopamine and serotonin levels.
Right.
Different things like that. Those are controllable things, which are uh, which are part of your epigenetics. So
Right.
in movement, let's say movement is your gene, which it's not, but let's say it is, then you could say the epigenetics for movement is quantity, quality, diversity of movement, and the timing of it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what you look at when you're looking at genes versus genetics and epigenetics.
Right. Because it's so profound. We have so much more control, and our body has the ability to heal if we remove those interferences. And then all these beautiful things can happen from head to toe at the cellular level. Our body is really designed to heal itself.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. So where can my listeners find you? And it's going to be in the show notes too.
Okay. So I am found at www.graceanatomyfunctionalhealth.com.
Awesome.
And you can find me on Facebook. I don't, I'm not very out there on social media, but I do have Facebook. I do have Instagram, and I do have a YouTube channel under Beth Krause, but I'm not super active yet on the social media front.
Okay, that's okay. You'll get there, right?
Yeah.
It's awesome. Well, I appreciate you sharing and telling your story and how you overcame all of this and just how your life is thriving now. So I just appreciate you, Beth. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much, Laurie.
Awesome. Thank you, all listeners. Make sure that you like, subscribe, and share this, especially with anyone going through a cancer diagnosis right now. If you want to learn more about my story, it's in episode 1 of the Take Back My Brain podcast. And I look forward to seeing you all in the next episode. Have an amazing week.